recording. And here we are. This is a picture of, guess where?
Puglia.
Puglia, of course, because of the truly in the background. That's these little kind of fairy style structures, houses. There's still many of them around. And they're interspersed with the vineyards, of course. So we're going to be looking at Puglia today and a number of other regions, Abruzzo, Calabria, Sicilia. That's me, of course. This is our fifth session. And let's dig in. So now we've been really, spending a lot of time up in the north for the most part. Now we're kind of getting into the south. I mean, north and southern and central Italy. We spent, in Tuscany and Umbria, Marche. But now we're getting down into the south, which is a whole other world in many ways. Certainly the wines are different, the food is different, the grape varieties are different for the most part. So it's exciting, and that this is, and it's not black and white. It's not like the upper half, north versus south. Every single region of Italy has its own unique identity and character, but you can make a big basic division between north and south. It just has a different kind of feel to it. So Abruzzo, there you see over there on the eastern side, facing the Adriatic Sea. Sorry for these typos, kind of bugs me, but I'll fix it later. The Adriatic Sea on the eastern side, it's part of the Mediterranean. But there are four divisions of the Mediterranean Sea that surround Italy. So this is the Adriatic, and here is a topographical map of the region of Abruzzo. You can see it's sort of traced out around here. This is the town of Aquila, where there was unfortunately a big earthquake there some years ago and did a lot of damage. Still very active, fault lines and things like that. But what's really interesting for us to look at is the makeup of it. So you see a big area on the Adriatic coast, and a big, this sort of big going up into the hills here, and then you get right into the mountains. Now these mountains are the Central Apennines. These are now that we call them the Southern Apennines of Italy. They go, as we talked about before, down the entire spine of the peninsula from southern Tuscany, Liguria, and then all the way down to, we'll see it, the tip of Calabria, and then over into Sicilia. So this is really like the sort of dividing line, the backbone of the Italian peninsula. And Abruzzo, more than half of the region is really up in the mountains. So what does that mean? You can't really grow vines in the mountains. The hills, yes, very well. And much, even they tend, grapevines tend to grow much better in the hillsides than in flat plains and coastal areas. So take a look at this, and then we'll switch over to this. You can, you can even, so the green area is the wine growing surface area of Abruzzo. That's it, right there. About a little less than half probably of the overall surface area, and that's because there's so much mountainous area there. So there we are, the last one, and then so I'll go back a second there. So, and this is a growing area, and remember that because there are several appellations that we're going to look at that occupy the entire growing area of vine growing area of Abruzzo. They're regional appellations. So we'll take a look at those very shortly. Here, the key player in this region is a grape variety called Montepulciano d'Abruzzo. So, and don't be confused. I'm sure none of you are, but don't be confused between Montepulciano d'Abruzzo, which is a grape variety, and it's also a wine as well. Don't be confused with that and a village up in Tuscany that we looked at, Montepulciano, where they make Vino Nobile di Montepulciano and Rosso di Montepulciano and other wines. But the two only share the name. There's nothing else that they have in common. There's really no other relationship between them. So can be a little confusing for some people, but important to make that distinction. Okay, so here we're going to look at this appellation, Montepulciano d'Abruzzo. It's a DOC appellation. It requires a minimum of 85% of this grape variety, Montepulciano d'Abruzzo. But if you look at the four wines, the four Montepulciano d'Abruzzo that we have, they're all 100% Montepulciano. Like I said, it's really the key player here, the superstar of this area. There are a few others, but really primarily Montepulciano. And you know, you can. This is a minimum. 85% is a minimum. You can always go beyond that if you want as a producer. You just can't go below it and use the appellation. It requires a minimum of 85%. So let's look at these. I'm not sure how many of you have tasted a Montepulciano. It definitely is different than Sangiovese, for example. However, the two go very well hand in hand. We'll see some other examples of that where they're very, very good blending partners. But in this case, these are all 100% Montepulciano d'Abruzzo. The alcohol level is all the same, 13 degrees. They can go a little bit higher, not really much lower than that, just because of the climate there. Differences between them are, I mean, I think the character of the grape variety really stands out more than anything else, and where it grows. This is really one of the main bases of Montepulciano. We'll see it pop up in other areas, of course. But this is probably its real home, and there are this you know, the appellation incorporates the name of the grape variety, so that kind of says something right away that is integral part of this wine growing area. Now you can see here the differences just going across the top. Oak aging versus stainless steel. And you can see the first two, Bosco and Rocolana. The first wine spends some time in wood, as does the last one, the Fantini Casale Vecchio. And you know, most of the others, I'm just taking a quick look. The other two are stainless steel. So you have wood aging versus stainless steel. And I mean, we call it wood aging. It's not aging like you would age in your cellar. This is part of the vinification process. So I mean, the better term, they're not aging, they're maturing or they're refining. Raffinato is a term that's often used in Italian for this period of maturation in barrel or in a container before the wine is bottled and released. That's very important. In French, they like to call it élevage. But here, there's a big difference between wine that is aged in wood of some kind and wine that is aged in stainless steel. What is it? Primarily, it's not about contributing the flavor of wood to the wine. That is really not the point, at least it shouldn't be, which is why the idea of adding wood chips or oak staves to a fermenting vessel is, to me, absurd, because it's not about the flavor. It is about, it's not even about the tannin, because unless you're using a brand new oak barrel, it's not really going to convey too much tannin to the wine. The tannin in the wine comes primarily from the skins and the seeds. But what it does permit is a slow oxidation from the wine inside the container to the air outside, and it goes through the pores of the wood. There's no wine leaking out of a barrel. So this transference of air from the inside to the outside takes place through the pores of the wood itself, and this raises another issue. Well, two other issues. One is the size of the wooden container, and you see on the left, Bosco is aged in Slavonian oak casks. Now, that's a type of wood. It comes from Slavonia. It's an oak, of course. But when you say Slavonian oak, we're talking about large casks, which mean they're made of very thick. I shouldn't say very, because the wood is really only about 2 to 3 inches thick. But compared to the other one on the right side, Fantini Barrique, when we talk about Barrique, we're talking about usually 225-liter capacity. Um, Barrique is a French word, so these are typically French barrels, but in this case, they're made of American oak, probably in the United States. We make them here, but they're thin wood. So the transference of air is much different in a small barrel made of thin wood compared to a large cask made in Italian. We call them botte or botte, a large cask, a very thick wood. The other thing is that barriques have a lifespan of, I mean, typically people who are using barriques, they want the properties of sort of transference, like an easier transference of oxygen. And also, many people use new barriques. They want the toasty vanilla kind of quality that comes from the toasted wood on the inside of the barrel, which you have to do so that it doesn't leak out. But then after 3 or 4 years, for most people who use barrique, they're useless to them. They get new ones. It was very common in the 70s and 80s to use all brand new small barrels in Italy. But then you get that kind of toasty woody quality that can in some cases really overwhelm the wine itself. There are people who in France who use barriques only as small containers for the oxidation, the oxidative effect, and they use them for as long as they possibly can. I spent some time working with Krug in Champagne, who's one of the fairly few houses that has always continued to use small barrels for for vinifying their wines, and they use them as long as they possibly can, 25, 30, 40 years. But that's a whole different story. And the other thing about these containers or wooden containers is the Slavonian casks are much larger, 1,500 liters, 2,500, up to 40 or 50,000, 40 or 50 thousand liters. So that's a big cask. What that means is compared to a small 220, 25 barrique, is that the surface area of the wine inside to the wood outside is much greater than it is in a very large cask, because a relatively small amount of the wine is actually in contact with the surface. Even though the container is much larger, there's much more quantity in the barrel. So those are big considerations. Now those two on the outside, whether it be large casks or small barrique, that makes a difference in the maturation period compared to stainless steel, which is neutral. So when people are doing that, they're minimizing the influence of oxygen. It just matures differently. It doesn't breathe in quite the same way. There has to be some oxygen transference, otherwise the wine will become reductive, which you don't want. If it's totally open and left open, it'll oxidate, which you don't want either. So it's a kind of in-between thing we're talking about. But without any influence of a wood container, whether it be new or old, where you get the kind of toastiness or not in a big cask, you don't really get it that much. You still get this oxidative effect, and certainly if you're using new barrels, you get this kind of toasty quality. In a stainless steel container, that does not happen. It does not contribute any sort of flavor component to the wine at all, either through oxidation or through wood, which means that you're getting the straightforward character of the grape variety itself, obviously having undergone fermentation. So, two different styles, and then a few more permutations within that in this Montepulciano d'Abruzzo wine. And there's 4 of them to kind of taste and compare. Now, Fantini is actually a brand from a larger company called Farnese, and we'll see them again later on in a different region. They have holdings in a number of different regions of central and southern Italy. So these are two wines that are kind of out of the box a little bit. The first one is a Sangiovese. Quite a bit of Sangiovese also grown in the area of Abruzzo. This is an IGT appellation, and it comes from the area around around Chieti, which is kind of in the central part of Abruzzo. 100% Sangiovese, a little bit lower alcohol level, and about 10 to a certain percentage of the wine, it probably varies from one vintage to another, is aged in oak, and then the rest in stainless steel. So here you have kind of a combination. They're using oak for a fairly small percentage of the vinification, the actual maturation period. But then once they blend them together and in a large container and then let it sort of sit and settle before bottling, it makes a big difference. It adds a different sort of character to this of wine from the same grape variety, obviously the same wine. And we could say that gives it a little bit of complexity. Now, would you know that if you're tasting it? If you have a very, very sensitive palate, and it also depends on what kind of oak they aged it in, you might be able to pick up on that. A little bit of that sort of oxidative, perhaps, sort of slightly woody quality that you might pick up, but maybe not. It just adds a little something extra. Now, the other one is sort of a special edition wine, and this is very interesting, I think, because it kind of straddles two regions, Abruzzo and Puglia. So these are cinque autoctoni. Of course, cinque is five. Autoctoni means autochthonous or native, we would say. These are kind of a blend of five different native grape varieties from two different regions. So and these are some of the other key players of the area that we'll see when we're looking at other regions too. Namely, Primitivo, about 30%, and Negromaro. Those are not really they don't play a very big role in Abruzzo at all. They're sort of big players in another area that we'll be looking at shortly, Puglia. And Malvasia Rossa, 5%, very small quantity. However, an important grape variety. But I shouldn't say, well, this grape variety, Malvasia Rossa, is a type of Malvasia, but there are many different types. There are many different grapes that are called Malvasia. Some of them are white. In this case, it's a red one, and we'll also come across Malvasia Nera. Most of the Malvasia that we're familiar with are white grapes, but whether they're red or white, they tend to be very aromatic grapes. So one of the things that they contribute, even in very small percentages like this, is an aromatic factor to the blend, and it's not going to really, it's not like an aromatic wine, but it adds a heightened aroma profile to the overall blend. You have Montepulciano, Sangiovese, Primitivo, Negromaro. These are pretty intense grape varieties. Each one has their own pretty strong personality, but and I would say the Malvasia adds, contributes a little bit of finesse to the aromatic profile of it. Fairly long maceration period, so we know the wine ferments, and you can have a maceration before, during, and after. Maceration will often, well, if you're gonna you crush the grapes in some way, maceration starts immediately once the liquid, the must, is in contact with the pomace, all of the solid parts of the grapes that go into the fermentation tank, and they're macerating before fermentation starts. Then one way or another, fermentation begins, whether it's by use of ambient yeasts or floating around in the cellar in the area, or inoculation, where selected yeasts are added to this to the must to induce fermentation. But they're macerating the entire time, and then oftentimes, so the fermentation period usually takes 10 to 14 days for the fermentation chemical process to take place. But then after that, if it's a red wine, people will often leave the grapes, the pomace in contact with what is then wine for a longer period for a couple different reasons. One is to leach as much color as you can out of the grapes. Another is to leach as much tannin and other flavor compounds from the skins and the seeds. And then maceration continues until the wine is racked off. So the liquid is removed from the container, and then the pomace is left inside. We talked about that with Amarone a bit, with the ripasso. They use it for something else. In many cases, in areas where they produce grappa, for example, they'll take the pomace and they'll put it through the press. Maybe they'll squeeze out. They'll use some of the press wine perhaps to top off the wine as it's aging, to fill out the barrel so it doesn't oxidate. But and then the pomace will be sent off to a distillery to be distilled into a marc or a grappa. So 25-day maceration fermentation period, and then 3 months in barrique. So we're talking, once again, small barrels, and about 14% alcohol by volume. So moving into Puglia, there it is down there. Just a little bit, there's Molise. So we don't really talk about Molise right now because it's not in the portfolio. Molise used to be part of Abruzzo. Just like we were talking when we were up in Emilia Romagna, we were saying that this is a kind of compound region of two very different and independent subregions. That's what Abruzzo used to be. It used to be Abruzzo Molise, one region, but then Molise decided to separate, which I'm sure took quite a while, but they did. Interesting area, pretty small, not too much wine produced there, but there's at least one interesting grape variety, and it's a very important region, certainly. But so skipping over that one, we go to Puglia, a fairly large region, and this is, to my knowledge, the largest producer of olive oil in Italy, and they sell a lot of olive oil to other people, including some very prestigious olive oil producing or packaging areas in central Italy. I won't mention any names, but they're a big supplier of very high quality extra virgin olive oil. They actually bottle and label and commercialize relatively little of it themselves, unfortunately, but hopefully they will begin to be doing more of that. They already have over the past 10 years or so. They also produce a lot of bulk wine, as many other places in southern Italy have historically done. One of them is also Sicilia, which we'll be talking about, but Puglia is been a big producer of bulk wine to send to other areas to help bulk up their wines, which you can do in many cases, and some other cases you cannot. Here is the wine growing area of Puglia. We're going to be looking at a few places here. It's a big and very complex map, and unlike Abruzzo, a very sizable part of the area is planted to grapevines. Another interesting thing about Puglia is, we're talking about the Italian peninsula and the boot and all that. Puglia really occupies the heel of the boot, which means that it's sort of a peninsula within a peninsula, which, it's in that. So this is one place where it's not an island. We'll be looking at Sicily later and then Sardinia next time, but which are completely surrounded by water, of course. But this one is on both, has two parts of the Mediterranean Sea, the Adriatic side and the Ionian side. And this southern part is surrounded by water on three sides. So the first area we're going to look at is Gioia del Colle. We're not going to really be looking at Gioia del Colle itself, but that area, let me just back up there, sort of in the southern part of the the peninsula, the Italian peninsula side before it gets out onto the heel. And you see Bari over there on the coast, a very important coast town. So this is the area we're going to be looking at in one of the wines. But before we do that, we talk about key players here. Primitivo and Negro Amaro are really the two superstars. They're kind of a duo, and they kind of trade off here and there sometimes. But these are the two key ones. And I threw in this other one that, in all honesty, it was kind of new to me. And that's one of the things I love about Italian wine is, as I think I mentioned at the outset, Italy has more grape varieties than anywhere else that I'm aware of, except perhaps for Georgia. But then they don't even really know what they are. They're not all in commercial production. But Italy. So I was not really familiar with this grape variety Suso Maniello. Apparently, it's a dialect word which means to load up the mule. Because they used to use mules to kind of transport their grapes, and they could only hold a certain amount. And this was one they would every time they picked them, they just kept loading up the mule because it's so prodigious. It just produces a lot. So we'll look at that. In one particular producer is using this grape variety frequently in their wines. So before we get there, let's talk about the IGT Puglia Primitivo from Poggiobasso. So this is located in this province of the province of Bari. We saw that, Central Puglia, inside this Gioia del Colle area, which is its own DOC, so they cannot use that term, of course. Interestingly, this is on the Murge Plateau, which is a very particular topographical configuration in Puglia, kind of right in the center here. And it's a very interesting soil configuration called, it is really, it's part of geology, it's called karst. In Italian, they call it carso, which, and it's named after another place where it's very prominent, which is in Friuli in Istria. So this is the Carso. There's a Carso Plateau. This is the Murge Plateau, but it's the Carso configuration of rock, which is sort of it's very flat, and it has a lot. It's very porous, and it has a lot of kind of subterranean tunnels in it, and underground sort of passages where water flows or used to flow. So an interesting soil configuration. This is 100% Primitivo. The vines are a good age, 40 years plus. What are old vines? Well, it's all relative. There's no real definition of that. Vines tend to go into production when they're about 5 years old. They tend to really kind of reach their maturity at 8 to 10 years old as far as production goes. And but then what is old? Well, for some people it's 20 years. For some people maybe 25, 30, if you're talking about California, 20 years is sort of an old vine. But other areas, they can grow much older. We will see some of those in other areas where, depending on the soil and many of the old vines are also on ungrafted rootstock because they're grown in areas where phylloxera could not really make too much of a negative impact. So that helps them live longer than the phylloxera period. Many people had to replant. Anyway, 40 plus year old vines, that's getting pretty old. Which does impact the character. It's hard to say sometimes exactly how. One of the big ways is in yield. They just tend to yield less, and if because the plant is a little bit less vigorous, but they have an established root system, and so they tend to produce wines that have more complex characteristics, and it's hard to really define that, but they tend to be a little bit less focused on you know, the acidity and the ripeness and more kind of subtle, mature fruit. But it's hard to really quantify that. This one, no wood at all. You see, this one is matured in cement tanks for about 6 months. And cement is great. It's a neutral substance. It, you know, oftentimes they were these. Many people had cement tanks, and they started pulling them out when people were starting to do more fermentation in wood. But people are actually going back to them because they're neutral. They allow some sort of very gradual uh, transference. I don't even want to say oxidation, but transference of air from the inside to the outside, but very, very slowly. They don't contribute any sort of character of their own. So it's neutral, but it does in some way let the wine breathe more than a stainless steel, which is very, you know, sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Like, you know, very clean and very neutral and very antiseptic. So you sometimes you want a little bit of interaction from what's inside the tank and what's outside of it. And the alcohol level here is fairly high, 14 to 14 and a half. Primitivo can definitely handle a fairly high level of alcohol because it has a lot of fleshiness and body to it, to the grape variety itself and the wines that are made from it. Now we're going to look at another area down in the south, right out on this peninsula, tacked onto another peninsula. The appellation, the area, the growing area is Cupertino, and it's a very interesting area. Here, it's really about Negro Amaro. This is a catena sociale, cooperativa, which means it's a cooperative. Sometimes cooperatives get kind of are looked down upon because it's not a single individual producer with their style and unique approach. It's sort of pooled efforts. We saw a lot of those up at, we saw one in the Valle d'Aosta, another in Carema, up in northern Piemonte. These are, and there's a lot of them also in Alto Adige, because many of the producers have very small holdings and they need to kind of pool their efforts, and they're very good. Cooperative cantinas can be very, very good, and they serve a very important function of allowing small wine growers to continue to do what they've always done and make very good quality wine on a commercial scale, so they can have get a foot inside the marketplace. It started out with 36 farmers who kind of got together to try to make a go of it, and sort of share some of the expenses of having a commercial winery. Now it's up to 300, and they have about 300 hectares, not necessarily 1 hectare each. Some probably have less and some a little bit more. So it's definitely grown over the years. And if you look here, you see something interesting. Their wine growing area of Cupertino is about 30 to 60 meters above sea level. We've seen other places that are 350, 400 and more. So this is quite low, really exposed to the Mediterranean influences, and a very interesting kind of regionally typical expression of this grape variety Negro Amaro. And you see also, interestingly, here is another Malvasia, which you see a lot in Puglia, Malvasia Nera. And these are distinct grape varieties from some of the others that we'll see, Malvasia de Lipari towards the end. And then there's one more down here, which is way down in the Salento area. And let me just go back here a second. You can see it's not really an area so much as the Salento, the Salento area of this peninsula. And here is a very interesting winery. It's Menhir Salento. Menhir, they have a lot of these old kind of structures around. Menhir is the name of one of these kind of old ancient really tribal constructions made out of stone that you find dotted around the area. A lot of stones are there, and here they're using this Susumaniello grape variety quite a lot, mixed often with Primitivo. Sometimes all on its own, is in the last wine. And you see here, they really this winery that was founded in 2002, so fairly recent, by two brothers, Gaetano and Vito Marangelli. They really want to just let the grapes, the grape varieties, and the place where they grow express themselves. There's no wood influence here. They do, and it was hard to get a whole lot of information about exactly what they do, but they did say in the Rosato, there's some maceration, of course, to get some of the just a little bit of the tint, the color from the skins, but not too much. A pre-fermentation maceration at a low temperature, which extracts a little bit of the color, and then they rack it off and allow it to ferment for 20 days. And after that, the fermentation period is finished. They let it sit in stainless steel. So they end the fermentation period, just even if it ends by itself, but they want to make sure that it ends, so they'll rack it again and make sure that there are no yeast particles left in the wine, and lower the temperature to really stop the fermentation. And then let it sit for 3 months on the lees, on the fine lees that are deposited by the wine itself. They sink to the bottom. And then they can either be filtered out or racked off, which might leave some small particles in it. Some people don't like to filter at the end. They just prefer to let, if there's going to be any really fine little sediment in the wine, it doesn't matter. This is, the pomace has been removed. What we call the gross lees are gone. The fine lees kind of sit after 3 months. They go to the bottom, and then the wine is racked off of that. So anything that would be left in the bottle would be nominal, but some people like to filter and fine it to make sure that there's nothing whatsoever, because they're afraid that people might be put off by a little slight cloudiness or deposits on the bottom. That's a choice. So the Rosato, very interesting, 70% Primitivo with 30% of this Susumaniello. The next one is a red wine. So here there's no there's a long maceration, 10 days, to really leach out the color of the skins of these two grape varieties. And then once again, sort of matured in stainless steel in a neutral vessel for about 3 months. Obviously a higher level of alcohol, because there's been more fermentation on the whole, more fermentation and maceration period. And the other one, it was a pre-fermentation macerations before fermentation even begins. And then finally, there's one that is 100% Susumaniello, which I would love to try, because I'm not familiar with this grape variety. And here you get, you get to really see what this unusual regional grape is about. And it's just called Pietra. This is sort of their series of these IGT wines from the Salento Peninsula. This one is also macerated and fermented for about 10 days. You see their process is pretty consistent across the 3 wines, with 3 months in stainless steel. So there it is, pretty straightforward, not a whole lot of manipulation. And one is the first is a Rosato version with a very short maceration period. The second 2 are both reds with a longer maceration fermentation period, so a longer period on the pomace. The first one being 60% Primitivo with 40% Susumaniello, and the last one being 100% Susumaniello. So there you have it. Moving into Calabria, way down there. Now that's sort of the opposite of Puglia. It's the toe, what we call the toe of the boot, another peninsula tacked down to a peninsula. Um, just one of the other things that we love about Italy is the complexity of the topography of the area itself. And then, I mean, as I mentioned at the outset, it goes from the south side of the Alps in the north all the way down to here. Now and we'll talk about it more when we get to Sicily. I mean, we're really much closer to northern Africa here than we are to Rome, to Lazio. So very different, very dynamic and diverse wine growing area. Now, this Calabria is one of the places where ancient Greeks who were, they're kind of going up and down the Mediterranean as traders and exploring things, and they certainly explored southern Italy a lot. They made important settlements in Campania, Calabria, Sicilia. Also, they had a presence in Puglia. When they first landed in Calabria, they called the area Enotria because for them it was a great wine growing area. There were probably already many vineyards growing there, and I think we talked about Valpolicella, and that meaning the valley of many cellars. Here, it's not really clear whether they called it Enotria because there were so many grapevines already growing there, or because they saw the tremendous potential for planting grape varieties there, which they did as well. In any case, it was a place that they could see right away was very well suited for viticulture. Here is the wine growing area, and once again, so you can see it's very sporadic. These are like sort of isolated sections on the map, and once again, there's a good reason for that. We're going to be looking at this one. Let's see. I'm not sure if I put in. Okay, I don't think I did. I don't think I put in a topographical picture here, but the reason for that, for the sparsity of wine growing areas, is once again the Apennines. They come right down the whole middle of Italy, and then they come around here, over here, right up until the end of Calabria, the tip of the boot. And guess what? They actually continue over into Sicily, which was once connected to this part of Italy. So they even extend over into Sicily. And the reason why the grape growing areas are so isolated is because of the mountains. So the first area we're going to look at is up here. But before we do that, the key player is a grape variety called Gaioppo, and this is really the major player of Calabria, sort of the signature grape variety of the area, and really as far as I know, the only area where it really grows, at least certainly in any significant amount. And it plays a big part in the wine growing here. So, and the most important appellation, I would say, for Gaioppo is one called Ciro, and that is the area of Ciro up there, the sort of magenta area very much on the coast. This is what it looks like. Pretty fleshy red grape variety with a very soft skin. So the color of Gaioppo tends to be quite dark. And you see the first one, 8 to 10 days, maceration, fermentation in stainless steel, and then 2 years of aging following fermentation period. And it's in a combination of stainless steel, small barrels. They don't really say if they don't make a division between the time period, and they also don't really say whether they're new or old, but they are small barrels and bottles. So, and this is required for the Reserva category of Ciro. Now, so you see how it's spelled out, the appellation Ciro DOC. That is the appellation. It can be a red wine or a white wine. It can come from the Classico area, which we talked about before, which is something we find throughout Italian wine. Classico refers to the original production area for a given grape appellation, where we think it probably originated as a wine. That's where the tradition started, wherever the grape variety might have been born. It's hard to say, but so like the tradition of the classic area production for a given wine. And this one is also a reserva. So Ciro DOC, that's the appellation. Rosso, because it's a red wine. Classico, because it comes from the classic area of Ciro production. And it's a reserva because it has aged or matured, however you want to say it, for at least 2 years. There you go. Here's another one, IGT Rosso. And this is, so this is just a general appellation from throughout Calabria, in this case, for a red wine, IGT Rosso Calabria. We see another one just to the right, and then another one at the end as well. We'll talk about that a little bit, but so we see IGT Calabria, could be either red or white, and it means it can come from any of the wine growing areas in the region. And be made up from a certain list of varieties that you can find in the Disciplinare, in the rule book for Calabria. What are the approved grape varieties for the region of Calabria, red and white? In the case of the first one, from Torre Aragonese, it is they use equal parts of 3 very important grape varieties for the area: Gaioppo, of course, Greco Nero. There are many many grape varieties in Italy called Greco. Most of them are not closely connected with one another. This was a Greco Nero. There's also Greco Bianco, a very important grape variety that we'll be coming across. And a third is Maiocco, which is an autochthonous variety of Calabria. Spends 12 months in small barrels and about 3.5 degrees alcohol by volume. Then we move to Termine Grosso. This is another IGT Rosso Calabria. You see Gaioppo once again playing a very important role, 55%. And then the remaining 45 is made up of international grape varieties. 15% Merlot, 15% Cabernet Sauvignon, and 15% Cabernet Franc. There's a 7-day maceration period for the Gaioppo and 25 for the others. Now, I would say that has a lot to do with the softness of the skin of Gaioppo, because it just gives off a lot of color much easier than Cabernet Sauvignon, for example, another dark grape variety, as is Cabernet Franc and Merlot. These are not like Sangiovese or Nebbiolo. They have much more anthocyanins, which is the chemical compound which contributes color. But so they use a different maceration period for Gaioppo compared to the other ones. And here they have a very diverse aging or maturing regimen: 6 months in stainless steel, followed by 18 months in large casks, 3 months in tonneau, which are 500-liter barrels, 1 month in barrique, which are 225-liter barrels, and 2 months in bottle. Sometimes I complain that people don't give enough information. Other times, here it is. It's a very specific regimen, going from stainless steel to wood in very large casks, to reducing it to smaller barrels. Small barrels are still they're small. They're nothing like a cask, a botte. 500 liters down to 225 liters, and then into the bottle. And the other wine from Termine Grosso is, here we see Greco Bianco, not to be confused with Greco Nero. And you could say, well, okay, so you have the Greco grape, which is there's a white one and there's a black one. No, Doesn't necessarily mean that they share the same genetic makeup. It's just another it's another name for maybe a grape variety that they thought was similar. In many cases, people called grapevines Greco. Well, some people used to think that it was because they thought it was a Greek, a grape variety that was brought over by the Greeks, but that probably is not the case. It probably was, it was used to make a wine in the Greek style, which was kind of a sweeter wine. We'll talk about what that might mean. How did it get sweet? Um, anyway, 80% Greco Bianco, 20% Trebbiano Toscano. They do a cryo maceration. So that means it's macerated. They're destemmed, crushed, and macerated. So they're on the white skins for 5 days. So they're macerated in a closed and enclosed environment. So there's not really, they're macerating, but not in a container that is going to allow them to sort of breathe and have any transference from outside. Following that, they're fermented in stainless steel, and no wood involved here. Stainless steel followed by after the fermentation is finished, they'll rack it off and then allow it to sit on the fine leaves for 3 months before bottling. Very interesting. Now we're going into to our fourth region today, Sicily. Whole different world unto itself. There you can, I mean, it's hard, you don't really need to point it out. It's just sitting there. It's off the coast of Italy, but just barely. It's off the coast of North Africa, but once again, just barely. It really is kind of a fulcrum between north and south, but it's also a big fulcrum between east and west, because here they're kind of out at sea there, and they've been dominated. The island has been dominated by many different people over a long period of time. We think the first Greek settlements there were around the 8th century BC. And I mean, of course, the Greeks left a lot of evidence of their time there, a lot of temples. I think there's more ancient Greek temples in Sicily, in the southern part around Naxos and Agrigento, than there are in Greece these days. So the Greeks spent time there a long time ago, and then the Arabs came, and the Moors, the Muslim people from Spain came as well, and then many other people, all of whom have left kind of their mark, but Sicily remains its own place in many different ways. We talked about the importance of Piemonte for the reunification of Italy. Well, one of the ways that they were able to do that was by obtaining control of the kingdom of Sardinia, and then also the kingdom of the two Sicilies, which was the kingdom of Sicily and the kingdom of Campania, the Bourbons who were in Campania. So they were able to sort of, Sicily and Campania formed the two Sicilies before, and then later on, the House of Savoy was able to incorporate them into their kingdom, and that was the way that they were able to begin to unify Italy under a constitutional monarchy. Okay, so aside from all that stuff, which I think is really interesting, and it does impact in some way on the wine growing tradition there. It's been going on from thousands of years, of course. There's a very complex climate here on this island and diversity of wine growing areas. It's extremely far south. As you see, it's almost, as I mentioned, it's almost touching North Africa. It's really in the southern, almost tropics of the Mediterranean. But a lot of this, you think, oh, it's so far south, it's got to be really hot there. It is in some places, but in many places it's not, because these high southern, almost subtropical climate is mitigated by altitude. There are a lot of places on Sicily that are very high. And so you find this combination of Mediterranean influence as well as almost continental, because in some places you're up at very, very high altitudes, and it, where it snows a lot in the wintertime. So a very interesting combination of those different things. Here is another topographical map, and you can see it right there. The dimple on the right side over there is Etna, the biggest volcano in Europe and one of the most active volcanoes in the world. It is its own world of wine growing, and we don't have any of the wines from there, but the wine growing area goes all around this side on the north, the east, and the southern sides. Very, very interesting wine growing area. It's on a very much active volcano. Now, this very, very long tradition of wine growing and production in this area, dating back thousands of years, and it was highly regarded for a long time. But for most of the 20th century, with the reunification of Italy, with the advent of phylloxera that came and devastated a lot of areas. Not so much Sicily. Sicily was one of the areas that was it was impacted, but not as much as many other areas. And that's because a lot of the wine growing areas here are on volcanic soil, which is very loose and gravelly and sandy. And the phylloxera aphid cannot burrow tunnels down to the roots and kill the vine. That's what did the most damage. So they were able to in some ways benefit by selling bulk wine. They were in a way, they were producing more wine than they ever had and selling it to other places, including France, who were really suffering under phylloxera. They were having a hard time growing any grapes. So Sicily benefited monetarily, not economically so much, but monetarily. They were able to sell grapes, but they were anonymous grapes. They were used by other people besides France, besides other European countries. They sold a lot to northern Italy as well. They were used anonymously to bulk up and in some cases take the place of other wines there that they were not able to make. So, in an area like Sicily that is so mountainous and on volcanic soil, that especially volcanic areas around Etna, they're so high and steep and difficult to work. You're selling bulk wine. You're getting the bottom price for your grapes or for your wine. So they really suffered a lot, and from these really, as I mentioned, fantastic, unique wine growing areas. They were selling bulk wine to other places, and it's really kind of a shame. Over the past couple of decades, they've really been making a comeback in many different areas, especially Etna, but many different areas as well. So there's a lot to see from Sicily, and it's very exciting to see that happening now. Here we have the main wine growing areas. And you can see here, we'll talk about Marsala. Marsala is a very important reality for Sicily. That is one of the wine growing areas that was able to continue pretty much well, I don't want to say unhindered. The production never failed, and it was the one wine that was really closely connected with the area of origination of Sicily. I mean, Marsala is the name of a wine. It's the name of a place. This part of Sicily as well. Although many people they just knew of it as a kind of cheap wine that's often used for cooking or kind of taking a nip every now and then. But at least it was one that carried the name, even though it was adulterated and. So now we're going to be talking about a winery called Casemate. This was founded in the area of Faro up there by Gianfranco Sabatino in 2008. And then he brought in someone else, former soccer player named Andrea Barzali as a partner, and a little bit later on. They have 11-hectare holding planted 2 native varieties. Good for them. Here, and we'll see pictures of them shortly, I hope. Nerello Mascalese is the principal grape variety of Etna, for one, and also the other place that it really grows in Sicily is Faro. It plays a big part in Faro as well. So Nerello Mascalese and its sort of game partner Nerello Cappuccio, as well as Nocera and Nero d'Avola. Nero d'Avola is probably the most widespread grape variety of Sicily. Their vineyards are at about 500 meters above sea level, and they face north. It's very interesting here because north facing is a little bit cooler. They're fairly high up. And here too, they get a lot of influence by both the Ionian and Tyrrhenian seas, because you get these breezes going, being channeled back and forth through the strait. And there's a big, the Strait of Messina, I should say, not Gibraltar. And there's a big, what they also have there is a very big diurnal shift. And diurnal shift is the difference of temperatures during the day and during the night. And it's very positive, especially in warm areas where you absorb a lot of heat and sun during the day. You have cool nights. So the bigger the diurnal range, the better it's thought to be. Then they lock all of those characteristics and the energy into the vine and the characteristics into the grapes during the maturation period. And they give the plant a rest too. So it's not really suffering under the sun. It's like, you spend a day out at the beach and then you go into a relaxing, cool place and go to sleep. Here's Casemate. We have the Faro DOC, and you see the Nerellos, Nerello Mascalese and Nerello Cappuccio, playing a very prominent role in this appellation. 80%, with 10% of Nocera, 10% of Nero d'Avola. Here the harvesting period is a little bit different. The Nerello Mascalese likes to spend a little bit more time on the vine, a little bit later maturation than Nero d'Avola, for example. Here they do fermentation in upright conical stainless steel tanks. It's a shape, but some people feel that it makes a difference, and it kind of mimics a type of barrel that is called a tini in Italian, which were these upright conical tanks. So it's much more narrower at the opening, and then widening out to the bottom where the lees and the sediment collects. They do a punch down 5 times a day during the first month, and then they kind of slow it down after that, and then press the wine out and let it remain on the fine lees until January. So there's a long period of time with lees contact, which makes a difference. I'll mention what that is in a second when we talk about the other wine. So the Faro is matured in small and medium-sized French oak barrels for about 9 months. So that is a barrique and a tonneau. And then after that, 6 months in bottle to let it settle. Very interesting appellation from a very interesting area, right at this kind of northeastern tip of Sicily. The Terre Siciliane IGT is a Sicilian-wide IGT, Indicazione Geografica Tipica. Here it's Nerello Mascalese 70% and Nocera 30%. So there's no Cappuccio here. Once again, there's a difference in the maturation period of the grapes themselves. And lees aging, what does that mean? It's pretty subtle, but it tends to give the wine, just allowing the wine during its later stages of fermentation is finished. This is really just the maturation period, but on the fine lees, It's you're taking the skins off, so there's no more pigment coming out of the skins. The seeds are gone, but the fine leaves just tends to give the wine a little bit of rounder body and a little touch of creaminess. You feel it more in white wines than in red, but it just kind of softens the wine a bit. The Terre Siciliane matures in new tonneau for 3 months. They indicate that there, 500 liters, followed by 3 months in bottle. And then there's another wine that they make, Sicilia DOC. So this is a region-wide appellation. So anywhere from Sicilia, made from any of the grape varieties that are approved for the region, of which there are many. Grillo is a very, very important one, as is Caricante for the white variety. They're actually both white varieties. So they're pressed right away, and then they add dry ice, they say, to lower the temperature immediately, and actually sort of postpone the fermentation. So they're just being really chilled down, and ferment in stainless steel for about 15 days, so not very long, and 3 months in bottle to settle. So here you're getting these two grape varieties, Grillo and Caricante, in a pretty straightforward manner. Now here's another Terre Siciliane, consisting of Nero d'Avola, as I mentioned, probably the most widespread red variety of Sicily. This one is 100% Nero d'Avola. You can see the winery Vigneti Zabù, which is a winery that was created by the Farnese group we saw from Abruzzo in 2007. There, it's located in the town of Sambuco di Sicilia. Here, there's a proximity to a fairly large lake, Arancio, which has a moderating influence on the climate there. Not too far from the coast, but as I mentioned, the lake kind of helps moderate the climate. 100% Nero d'Avola with a maceration fermentation for about 10 to 12 days, and then all stainless steel. Another Terre Siciliane, this one Pinot Grigio from the wineries located around Alcamo in the northern part. And we're really getting out now towards the area of Marsala on the sort of western tip of Sicilia. Winery was founded, it's a family winery founded in the 1950s. Originally, they were just growing grapes and selling the grapes or the grape must. Now, then they started, a generation later, started really making wine, creating, vinifying and bottling and labeling. And now they've grown considerably to about 150 hectares of vineyard. Here, being so close to the coast, it's primarily alluvial soil with, they say, a lot of carbonates and micro elements in it, probably because of the marine influence being so close to the coast. There's a short maceration period here, which means a short period of time on the skins, and that is to extract the pigment of Pinot Grigio. Pinot Grigio, of course, grigio means gray. It's Pinot Gris in French. And it has, the Pinot Grigio has a kind of grayish, pinkish hue to it. And many people just press it right, put it right in the press, so it's nice and white and clear. Typically Pinot Grigio has a kind of pinkish color to it, or even grayish. Here they call it ramato, which comes from the word for copper, ramo, and it looks like a rosé wine, and that, I mean, I think it's a very nice thing. Years and years ago, when I had a restaurant, I put a Pinot Grigio on the list. I think it was the only one we had at the time that was made very much in this manner, and people were offended that it was kind of pinkish when I poured it into the glass. No problem. I took it back and drank it and got them something else, nice and clear and white. But so a very interesting, very kind of typical Pinot Grigio. And I mean typical because Pinot Grigio has this pigmented skin to it. Going into Marsala, as I mentioned, very important from a commercial standpoint of keeping Sicily on the map as a wine producing region. Um, Okay. Yeah, and many people look down on Marsala as like a cooking wine, or it can be a really, really great wine. There it is. It's a large wine growing area. We have two Marsala, both from Antichi Baronati, and they're exactly the same. Grillo is a big player in Marsala, one of the three prominent grapes there. Inzolia is another. So you can see almost everything is the same. And Antichi Baronati is an old winery founded in 1860. So long history behind it. Was purchased by a family named Vesco in the 1990s. Everything here is the same. The soil, same place. It's primarily loam. That is a combination of clay and sand. Here, look at the altitude, 30 meters above sea level. I mean, they're almost in the water. 21-day fermentation period. 18 months in large Slavonian oak, 3 months in bottle. So that's all the same. The only thing that really differs from the two wines, well, you can see one of them says sweet, which means here 100 plus grams of residual sugar per liter. The other one is dry. And Fine, just that Fine's, well, we'll talk about that. And the dry one, 40 grams of residual sugar. I mean, it's still kind of sweet for a wine, but it's not really meant as a wine to drink with your meal. It's more of a aperitivo digestivo. So so you have different levels of sweetness, and then the fine, in this case ambra, refers to the color. So what is it's fine ambra? That is the sort of, it's a darker, more oxidized version of Marsala. We have one more place to touch on here, which is part of Sicilia, but it's its own particular part in the Aeolian Islands. Now these are volcanic. It's a volcanic archipelago. There's actually 8 principal islands and a lot of other little tiny ones. We think primarily, well, there's 8 principal ones, but we really think of Lipari, Vulcano, Salina, Stromboli as the really main ones. And they are, Stromboli certainly is an active volcano, but it's not active as far as eruptions. You see a lot of smoke and stuff coming out of the top at night, but it's not really creating too many lava flows and things like that, the way that Etna is. But so an archipelago of volcanic islands. Malvasia delle Lipari is also, is the name, it's Malvasia delle Lipari is a grape variety. It's a type of Malvasia that we think is indigenous to this particular group of islands. We think it originated around the beginning, around the 1st century, but who's to know, really? And as far as we know, it's a genetically unique variety that has some markers in common with other Malvasia, but not that much. And Malvasia is another grape variety that is mostly white, but we've seen other red versions of it, even in some of these wines. So we have 2 wines. One of them is, and Carlo Hauner, I have to say, is he was originally from Brescia of mixed parenthood. Hauner is obviously a name from, probably from the north, but Carlo Hauner founded this winery. He was an artist and did many designer, many other things, but fell in love with the Aeolian Islands, specifically Lipari, and settled there, started making wine there. So the first one is DOC Classic. This is a wine that he really helped continue and put on the map in some ways. Malvasia delle Lipari, DOC. And this is a passito. There are different levels of sweetness. It can be a still wine, a sweet wine, and a passito. We'll talk about what that means in a moment. 95% Malvasia, small percentage of this other grape variety, Corinto Nero. Passito is a wine. They're made throughout Italy. We've seen them. We've seen them in other places, of course. Up in the Veneto, they call it Passito Recioto. But pasito really means to harvest the grapes, usually a little bit early, and allow them to dry out, to continue their maturation period off the vine under the sun. And what that, so they continue to ripen, they also lose their liquid, so they dry out, they shrivel up. Um, you can do it outside, as they do in Sicily, because they have a strong, obviously strong sun and a lot of breezes blowing, especially on an island like this. So they dry out quite well in 15 to 20 days. Other places in Tuscany, Vinsanto, often they'll hang them up in rafters, and it takes a little bit longer to dry out. During the fermentation, there's uh, fairly long, prolonged skin contact with the grapes while they're fermenting, and it's a long fermentation because there's a lot of sugar, and compared to the amount of moisture in the grapes. So after the fermentation is finished, they spend about 6 months in bottle, and it is a beautiful, beautiful pasito. You certainly get the concentrated sugar in the wine, sweetness, I should say, and also the soft kind of unctuous mouthfeel of a pasito. You can feel the viscosity of it, but you also get the influence of this volcanic soil and the salinity of the area, and the acidity of the grapes retain to balance it out. So it's not cloying sweet. It's a beautiful wine. If you're not familiar with it, I would definitely recommend you try it. Now they make a big portfolio of wines besides this one, and the Iera is one of them. It's IGT Terre Siciliane again. So this is kind of a catch-all IGT for the area of region of Sicily, of which the Aeolian Islands are part of. And this is a red wine made from Calabrese, Alicante, and Nocera. They don't offer the quantities. Maybe it changes from year to year. Here they do an extended skin contact during fermentation. They don't say how long it's extended, but they just say extended skin contact. And then there's aging in stainless steel vats. Once again, they don't really provide any details on that. Plus 4 months in bottle. So they let it sit on the skins as long as they feel is necessary, and let it age in stainless steel until they feel like it's kind of reached its peak of maturation, and then put it in the bottle and let it rest and mature for 4 more months. And these, so here I should mention for the Malvasia, most of their vineyards are located in Salina, where the winery is located. And for the Iera, they're located in Volcano, which is another one of the islands where they have vineyards. So that is it. Whew, are there any questions? Maybe I can check the chat box now.
Of course, I have a question, Alan.
Dario, per favore.
Actually, it's a kind of a clarification. Then I always question myself, and you're the perfect person to ask. So we saw that some of the wines are going through cement, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So cement, it's very porous material, very dusty. How is it treated in order to not affect the wine? Because originally I thought, well, maybe inside there is a fiberglass, but if you have fiberglass, then you have no micro-oxygenation.
Right.
Right. So how is the cement vat made? How is the cement treated?
So, I mean, that's a really good question. I'll tell you, like many of the.
I can hear you, Alan.
Can you hear me now? What happened?
Yes, I can hear you.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Oh, sorry, I had the.
So Dario, that's a good question. Many, I don't know, I don't want to say most, but many of the cement tanks are vetrificato. So the inside of the tank is covered with glass. And I'm not sure if it's a thin layer of molten glass or how they actually apply that, but they'll often say cemento vetrificato. So that is one way of doing it so that there's no absorption by the cement. But many of the tanks are not, and you could line it with fiberglass, but then if you're going to do that, you would just have a fiberglass vat, which many wineries used to do, and then there's really no exchange whatsoever. But many people who have these old cement tanks, and they can be very large. You would see a lot of old wineries that were big commercial wineries that just had like this whole row of very large casks. They would kind of treat them like botti. I mean, they many of them were not vetrificato. Many of them they're just cement, but they're not. It's not dusty inside. I mean, it's a very hard cement, and they might absorb some wine, but it doesn't really penetrate inside. And once they've used them for a few times, I mean, there's a, it's like a botte that has been developed. All the pores are closed. So
Alan,
Can it also be like I like Dario's question because I've actually asked that myself. But, I'm using this as probably a silly example, but it may make the example. One of the things that they tell you not to do with an espresso machine is never wash it with soap, just rinse it out.
yeah,
Because the porous material, the aluminum, actually absorbs the flavors of the coffee.
yeah.
And over a period of time, it actually enhances the flavor of the coffee itself
Yeah.
over, many, many, many uses. Is that kind of the same thing of what you're saying with
Yeah, I think it is. And I mean, and this is in cement tanks that are not coated with glass. And many of them are. You'll often see people that are using it. They will say in Italian, they will say cemento vetrificato. But yeah, yes, what you're saying too is that cement is porous. It's slightly porous, but the wine is not going to leak. Liquid is not going to leak out of a cement vessel. So maybe on a surface area, you might get that, and it's not negative. It's not going to be. People are not sort of scraping it inside, so it's not going to turn into dust or sand or anything like that. And the other thing that you have to think of is all. So wood is another example. You can store wine in a wood barrel, whether it be a large cask or a smaller barrel, and there will be a minor transference of air from the inside to the outside, but the wine is not going to leach out of it. The same thing is true with cement, which is organic, slightly porous, but not but not a material that water is going to leach through. And the same thing is true with amphora, with terracotta, which was also used, for thousands of years to store and transport wine, and also now is having kind of a comeback. So these porous organic materials are neutral. They don't contribute any flavor component to them the way that new barrels can, for example. And they allow a very slow kind of transference of oxygen, micro oxygenation, they call it. But they don't really get dusty inside. And I think your analogy to an espresso machine is a good one. You want to kind of coat those pores, but not start to scrape it off, because then you're going to be getting some some obstruction actually.
Alan, it's Dave. My family's from Basilicata, and my cousins have a cement botta. It's square,
Right.
and every year they call on. They'll get the grapes in a truck, and a big arm will come out. They'll grind the grapes, dump it right in there, and then they put a top on it where they rinse out the cement container. It's just cement. It's very smooth. They
Yeah.
rinse it out with water. They dry it, and then when the truck comes and grinds the grapes right there, puts it in there, there's a top to it that there's a very small. As they empty it, the top sits on top of the liquid, so the air comes out the side. There's a very fine space between the top and the edge of the vota. And as they empty it, you know, it goes down. So the air oxidates out through that that space between the top and the edge of the container. But they also have a stainless steel one too that works the same way. It's like a top that sits on the liquid, and as they empty from the spigot below, it goes down with the liquid. So
That's
just
interesting. I
wanted to
mean, I
share
haven't,
that.
yeah, I haven't, I guess I'm not really familiar with tops that sit right inside the liquid, and maybe that's something that is done specifically in cement.
It's
Cement
not
bath.
sealed 100%. It's very
Right.
fine
But you know,
space.
but during fermentation, you cannot seal 100% because a lot of carbon dioxide is given
Right.
off. And if it was completely closed container,
It'll blow up.
it would explode. Yeah. So, but it's interesting that they have it sitting right on. I mean, if they're producing red wine, macerating, if there's a maceration going on, all of the solids rise to the top. And the fine sediment will sink to the sandy sediment will sink to the bottom, but so you have a cap on top in whatever the container is, whether it's a stainless steel tank or a large bote or a barrique or wherever you're fermenting, the solids will rise to the top, and oftentimes they'll be punched down. Or sometimes too, there's a pump over where the liquid is taken out from the bottom and then pumped over the top. So it filters through this cap. But to hear, you know, a cap that's sitting right, a lid that's sitting right on top of the solids is kind of interesting. And you would think that, you know, sometimes they'll put something on top of this cap to keep it slightly submerged. So that the cap is always underneath the liquid. But so there are many, many different techniques out there. But you know, cement are good containers. They're neutral, but they do allow some sort of really micro oxygenation, and many people are kind of going back to them. Dario, I hope we answered your question, though.
Yeah, sure, you did. You did. Thank you. It's kind of what I tried to. I mean, I was thinking about it. There's got to be some kind of, you know, the coating or something mixed in. I know there is a lot of, well, now, as you know, like you said, they're going back. At the beginning, you know, in the 70s, 80s, they were tearing those tank apart, you know, space for the boat.
Yeah.
They're building it again.
Yeah.
Seems like then one of the advantages of the cement is it, first of all, holds better the temperature. You know, you're not subject to differentiation of temperature and things like that. And second of all, also protects the wine from vibration, noise, you know, which makes the wine move. You know, at least that's what I heard. And they're looking at.
Yeah, and if you think about it, cement is really an organic material. I mean, it's just sand and stones ground up and mixed with water. So you don't want, obviously, you don't want to find pieces of cement in or dust in your wine, but it doesn't. I'm not sure exactly how they seal them or whether they do seal them, but if you have cement, I mean, it's not going to start to flake off into the wine. If it's really, I don't know all the chemical components of cement, but it's, you know, it's protective. It doesn't really leach too much.
I didn't think cement was permeable.
Right. No, I don't think it is. I mean, I don't think it is. No, it's not.
They make bridges out of cement.
Yeah.
You know, pylons.
Yes, Jennifer.
Are all the square cement vats square? Do they ever use round? Would there be a reason why they wouldn't do round cement vats versus square? Is there, you know, do you do both, or is it just basically square?
I've only ever seen, they're not really square. They tend to be rectangular, and they tend to be quite large. And one, you know, they're just built like all together. They're not individual tanks. They'll have a whole row of them. So they share a wall or two. I mean, and maybe somebody will come up with now they're making egg-shaped or oval-shaped vessels out of different material. Terracotta is one, but I'm sure they do like these cement ovals too, that they say has a certain sort of impact on the fermentation, and there's some kind of a circular motion of the fermentation. I'm not, but these are all kind of people's ideas about that. But there never is. I've never seen individual, other than these kind of eggs or ovals. I've never seen individual tanks, but they tend to be they're constructed together, and they save they save space that way. So one, they're just all lined up, and they're divided into different sections for different wines and different lots, and they're very practical. They really maximize the amount of space that people have in their wineries.
Yeah, I think
Go ahead, Dario.
a construction easiness to have a rectangular rather than circular.
Yeah. I mean, they're much in terms of use of space. They're much more efficient than botti,
Exactly.
which are round, and you need to be able to get to them, and they take up a lot of space. But
Alan, I did in Basilicata, I visited this winery called Graziano Brothers, and they had stainless steel tanks. I saw the way they were holding the wine in tanks. There were two tanks, the outer tank and the inner tank. The inner tank had the wine, the must, the juice. The outer tank, they irrigated the water from the mountain through the outer tank to keep the temperature.
right.
So they were using that irrigation to go around the tanks. I thought that was interesting.
It's a cooling mechanism.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the things about that's one of the advantages of stainless steel. First of all, it's totally impermeable. It's very hygienic, and it's very easy to control the temperature, and it's easy to clean them out. So you can really do a lot of temperature manipulations with them very quickly. With other containers, you can't. So so they were using cold water from a spring or a well to help cool it down in this sort of inner layer surrounding the vessel where the wine was. So that was smart. So it's a good way to be able to cool something down, pretty quickly and economically.
I have a question, Mr. Allen.
Yes.
Regarding the cement and the oak, is if you want to reserve the wine from the cement, you can't reserve the wine for so many, I don't think so, right? Between the oak, because the cement doesn't keep you so long between the barrel,
I don't think I don't think that anybody really uses cement tanks as a long-term aging vessel. So if you're talking about a wine that requires extended aging period,
yeah,
like Brunello or or Barolo or Reserva, which is 5 years. Some people are doing 8-10 years of aging. I don't think that they would do it in cement, precisely for what we said about cement is it's permeable. It allows some micro oxygenation, but very little. And if you're going to have a wine sitting there for an extended period of time, it needs to be able to breathe. Otherwise, it's going to get reduced. And after that time, if you kept it for an extended period of time in a cement tank, you can't have the top off, because it'll oxidize very quickly. And even if it was closed, it would become reductive. So you would not want that either. It's a good vessel for fermentation and for short-term aging, but not for long-term aging at
for
all.
sure. Yeah, that's good. That makes sense completely. Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
So this, is this the final, this was the final class because we went into the south.
No, I'm sorry. You have one more to get through.
Oh, okay. So we had 6 total?
Yes,
Next week
Okay.
will be the 6th and last. There's Campania, Sardinia, and I forget what else, but
I was just totaling, I was looking at all my video links. I think I have them all.
you should. If you don't, just send us an email and I will forward it to you.
Okay, thanks, Dario.
okay, so I'm going to stop the recording.
Yeah, please.
Thank you very much. We'll see you next week for our last session.
Yeah.